Okay, I'll start admitting everybody to the room.
Hello.
We'll just give it a few more minutes for the last few attendees to join. Okay, let's make a start. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the Racial Equality Society's Wellbeing event. Thank you for joining. So, this evening we will be speaking to four different barristers about what well-being means in the context of the bar, how you can maintain good mental health and a strong well-being as a barrister, and what you can do to stay resilient and pick yourself up when you've had knockbacks. So, just a couple of housekeeping points to cover before we start. So, if everybody could please, everyone but the speakers could please turn their cameras off and keep your microphones muted throughout the duration of the event. That would be good. And we will be taking questions at the very end. However, you can put them in the chat throughout, and then we'll pick them up at the end with the speakers. So, in terms of our panel members, we have Jay Banerjee, who is barrister at 1 King's Bench Walk. We also have Ramya Nagesh, barrister at 45 Gray's Inn Square. Then we also have Regan Persaud at Spire Barristers and Master Rachel Spearing, KC, who is at Sergeant's Inn Chambers. With us today, we also have members of the Racial Equality Society committee. So we've got Kofo David, who is vice president, Seishan and Maxine, who are our wellness officers, Leanne, who is our treasurer, as well as Lene and Rachel Green, who is our social secretary. So for our speakers, if you could keep your cameras on only if you're speaking, and if everyone else could keep them switched off, then that'll just make sure that we've got our recording going correctly. So without further ado, Jay, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tamina. Thanks for the invitation to speak, and thank you everyone for listening to all of us. It's a really interesting opportunity because I suppose I've now been made to think back over the last 20 years about how I've looked at well-being and resilience differently over that time. But yeah, as you've heard, I'm Jay Banerjee. I'm a barrister at 1 KPW in London. I specialise in family law, mostly complex cases about children. It's not a particularly pleasant subject area. It's often quite difficult. I've been doing it for about 20 years. And as I mentioned, in that time, my take on it all, my attitude towards it all has been evolving constantly. So when I started, I didn't really, I suppose, have the easiest start to my time at the bar. I think it took me a few years to get pupillage. I then didn't get taken on at the set where I did my first 12 months, got a third six, didn't get taken on there. Did a fourth six at a different place, didn't get taken on there. So I would say certainly resilience and keeping the will to keep moving forward were first and foremost in my mind then. But I suppose I was in some ways privileged. I was a young man, I had no commitments, I was able to focus just on my wish to get somewhere in my career. And that's a real luxury. At different times of our lives, we may have caring responsibilities, family relationships, people who are financially dependent on us. But at that time, I suppose I had the bandwidth just to try to go ahead on strength of will. Following that time, I've, I suppose, been through many different feeling periods of my career. My memory is that the next phase of my career, I suddenly got everything I'd always wanted. I was a tenant at a family set in London. I was busy. I was getting good cases. And next thing you know, you have to start thinking about how is the workload affecting every area of my life, including my health, the quality of my relationships with people outside work. And I suppose the first thing to say is this. I'm guessing you're all largely at the beginning of your careers or about to start. It's a long time, right? So I've been at it 20 years and I must have about 20 more to go. So it's great to be able to work really hard. I bet you're all used to that. You may even pride yourself on it. but you can't sprint for 40 years. So I would say pace yourself. There are times when you've got to just work as hard as you can, but please just don't think that that's the only way to operate, or that you can operate like that on a mid to long-term basis. The other thing I would say is keep track of your goals from time to time, because they can shift. And one analogy I've heard is that if you're swimming and you're very determined to reach a certain point, and you've got your head under and you're swimming, from time to time, just tread water, put your head above the surface and look around and just think, do I still want to be swimming with all my strength in this direction? Or do I just want to tread water? Do I want to aim in a different direction? Or do I need to swim a bit slower to pace myself? And I think that's very, very true over the course of a long career, that you just need to reflect sometimes. And you can't reflect very well when you're stressed out or working full pelt or just entirely consumed by your career. So it may or may not work for some of you or for all of you to go full pelt at the beginning, but please don't think you can do it forever. I've been asked to reflect and to speak to you about, well, what does well-being mean to me? So certainly it's partly about my physical health, partly about my mental health. And I would say my goal is to try to thrive, not just survive. Because if you're just trying to survive, it's a sign to me that you're very focused on your work, and you're just using your body and your life as a vehicle to progress your career. Whereas if you're thriving, so you've got systems that work for you, you're in good physical health, that seems more of a long-term, better idea to me. But it can be difficult, because I don't know if any of the other speakers are going to say to you that you can have it all. For me, it's a constant challenge to try to perform at the top level while placing value on other parts of my life in a real meaningful way, by which I mean I'm investing my time and effort on them. We're all different people, we all tick differently. I tend to become more stressed out by just the volume of my workload and how persistent it is. It's not that I'm never emotional about my work-related stuff, but just 9 times out of 10, if I'm struggling, it's just because I keep saying yes to stuff all the time and just filling up my plate and just, having all of these responsibilities that I've then got to discharge. So some of the things I've learned is that you've got to have something else other than work. It could be family, it could be keeping in touch with friends from outside work, it could be sport or hobbies. And you've got to ring fence proper time. So, on a day where you might be at court in the afternoon, you might fit in a gym visit, but that's okay. But I really think that there's great value in carving out proper, focused, undistracted time for things other than work. And work can be invasive. I think it's like a gas. It will expand to fill all the time you allow it. And your email can ping. It can disturb your time with your spouse or your children, or a solicitor who you do a lot of work for might really want to speak to you while you're on holiday. I think technology is a real thing to keep track of. So at the moment, in direct contravention of all the things I've been saying, I've chosen to spend my evening, having worked today, doing this, but it was a calculated choice. I'm surrounded by screens, but some of the things you can do with this, on my main PC, I've got focus mode on, so it doesn't ping up emails all the time. And when I go on holiday next week, one of the things I plan to do is to disconnect my work email from my phone, so that I'm not constantly reminded, not constantly bothered, but I can still use my phone when I'm away. So I really think ring fencing space, ring fencing technology, ring fencing time are really important practices. And I think habits and practices and routines are things that I didn't put in when I started at the bar, and I had to learn to put in. So when I was probably in my late 20s, I'd find that I'd often get last minute briefs, and I'd spend till midnight, 3 a.m. drafting documents for court the next day, several, six days a week. I'd be in chambers working really late. And one of the things that I did was say, well, look, I'm going to book myself in with a personal trainer 3 weekday evenings a week, because that means that I've got to leave at 6. I've got to have eaten a healthy meal before I go to the gym. And it just means I'll just focus, get my work done, and be able to do something else in the evening, instead of slowly letting the time tick away while I sat there working till 11, thinking that I had all the time in the world. It sounds bizarre now. I hope you all emerge into a different bar than the one I came into. But I mean, remember to eat nutritious food. Remember to regularly look after your body in whatever way, whether it's because there's a sport that you like, or whether you just walk on the treadmill a few times a week, or go for a walk because you're just remembering to look after your body. When I started, things were really different. I emerged into a period where the old school bar, it was hard working, hard drinking. A lot of people didn't have much going on outside of work. They only had friends from work, by which I mean, they'd wake up, go to court, go for a few beers with the people they'd been against, or people from chambers, do some work, and do that every day. And it can be all consuming. And I remember seeing people like that and just thinking, I don't want to be doing that in my 40s. I don't want to be standing outside the pub next to my chambers. I mean, if that's what you want to do, that's one thing. But I think the generation of the bar that I started in were amongst the first people to kind of think of alternative ways to function at the bar. So think about the company you keep, the habits that you fall into, I think will be massively influenced by the people around you. So if you're in a hard-working, hard-drinking crowd and everyone's social life's very much revolving around chambers, that's likely to be how you operate. So make active choices about those kinds of things. And the next thing, and it's something that I still grapple with, and I suppose this is the kind of ongoing theme, is that at the bar, you feel, and I suppose are answerable at any one time to a large number of people. So you've got relationships with your instructing solicitors. Some of them will become friends, but they still expect. Judges expect. Clerks expect. Lay clients expect. So I think you certainly need to have some resilience about the fact that very frequently a lot of people will have expectations of you, will have wishes of you, some of which will be reasonable and some of which won't be, and that you've got to manage that and use your own judgment in terms of juggling all of those things. My personal experience changed a lot several years ago. So my dad became really unwell in the COVID lockdown. He had dementia. My mum wasn't coping, and I became his full-time carer in lockdown while working at the bar. And I remember starting what became a 100-day trial and just saying to the judge, I'm really sorry, I can't come unless you let me do this whole trial remotely. As of yesterday, I've become the full-time carer of an elderly parent. And the judge did let me do that. But I mean, one of the things that taught me is that, having prided myself on determination, work rate, I learned that you can't do it all. You can use up all your strength. So pace yourselves, as I said. There will be difficult times when other things come up, and you've really got to have practices in place, as I say, and you've got to learn to say no, because you just can't do it all the time. I've still got a lot to learn about that. There's a lot of pride at the bar in getting loads of work in, doing it really well, that the solicitors love you, that the clerks love you because you never say no to anything. And I'm not going to lie, I don't always practice what I preach, but I hope that all of you, as I say, just come into a much more evolved culture than the one I started in, so that by the time you're 20 something years in, you'll have just had a really different experience at the bar. I hope that was helpful. I hope even if each of you only learned one thing from that, that will stick with you, that it will serve you very well over the next 50 odd years at the bar. Other than that, if there are any questions, I think Tamina would like us to deal with those at the end, and I'll hand back to Tamina.
Thank you, Jay. Some really valuable insights there, particularly for all our student members. So next up, we have Ramya. So Ramya, over to you. Oh, I think the sound's disconnected, Ramya. It's not back on just yet.
Oh gosh, okay.
Oh, it's back now.
Oh, right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for A, putting up with those technical issues, and B, turning up to hear all of us speak on what seems to be a very sunny Thursday afternoon. A bit about me, I'm a barrister at 45 Gray's Inn Square in London. I specialise in inquests and inquiries predominantly, with a bit of general public law, a little bit of civil. But I started life as a criminal barrister. So I've had a bit of a route through to where I am today. I, like Jay, actually, I did pupillage in a different set from the one I'm in now, back in 2012, a set called 6KVW, which specialised in criminal law. Then I didn't get taken on there as a tenant. Did a year-long third six in another set called Two Hare Court, similar to the first one. Didn't get taken on there, and then did get tenancy in a chambers called Number 5 Chambers, which is a national set and does all sorts of different types of law. But I was doing crime again, and their crime group was largely based in the Midlands, so I moved to Birmingham for 3 years. Then I moved back to London, and then I ultimately decided that I didn't want to continue with criminal law for reasons that I think I will talk about a little bit, because they're sort of lifestyle reasons rather than about the work itself. And also to be closer to family and friends here, I wanted to stay in London, so I made the move to 45 Gray's Inn Square. So that's sort of a snapshot of my background. But one of the things we've been asked to talk to you about is the pressures and the demands that we've experienced in the various stages of our career. And you may not be surprised that there's some overlap in my kind of experience and advice with Jay's, because I think these are issues that come up quite a lot, and the advice is pertinent. But so I'll start with going through my sort of experiences, and I hope that some part of it may help you, or at least resonate with you. So I used to very much put the pressure on myself. I still do. We probably all do. That's one of the reasons we're in this profession. It's a personality thing, and it probably won't ever fully go away. But I did overdo it before. So starting with pupillage, I felt and I was extremely fortunate to be offered and accept pupillage in a set that was very good for what I was wanting to do. But that was after 4 years of applying, so I got it on my fourth application. And when I arrived and started my pupillage, it just looked like and seemed to me that everyone there knew what they were doing, even the other pupils. They just looked polished, they spoke the part, they looked the part, they just fit in. And I placed a lot of pressure on myself. If I was talking to, say, an established member of Chambers, and they were saying, "Oh, what do you think about this?" and I fumbled or got something that I thought was wrong or didn't know an answer to something straight away, I felt like everything was crumbling and that I'd failed somehow. I forgot that pupillage is a learning experience rather than a year-long test of whether they made a mistake taking you on. So if you're about to start pupillage, or if you're in the middle of pupillage, I would say do remember that pupillage is for you as well as for chambers to get to know you, but it's also for you to learn things. And nobody expects a pupil to start and know everything straight away. So take that pressure off yourself. We used to call it pupillage paranoia, but and it's very real. But it's definitely not something that you should be allowing to take over your mind and your everyday. And it might be worth saying, because this is a group with a focus on diversity, and we're talking about confidence and its impact on well-being. In the set I did pupillage, I was the only Asian person and one of only two ethnic minorities. And the place I did my third six, there were three ethnic minorities, I think, at the time, including me. And I mentioned that not because they said or did anything that made me feel they treated me any differently, because they definitely didn't. They were absolutely lovely, but because I think it accentuated my lack of confidence and that voice in my head that told me I didn't belong. After all, none of these people who'd made it and were people I was looking up to looked anything like me or shared my background or anything like that. And then that was only exacerbated when I didn't get tenancy in those sets. So what did I do? Well, I just worked harder and harder. I'd work late into the night, fall asleep on the sofa, wake up in the early hours, get to court, rinse and repeat. I never said no to work. I figured it would fit in somehow. So if the clerk said, can you do this? I'd say, yep, yep, absolutely. And to some extent, when you're doing pupillage and you're just starting out, there is an element that you do kind of have to be willing to take on work when asked. You can't, it's difficult to say no to a lot of things, but not the way I was doing it. That doesn't mean you have to say yes to everything. You still have to figure out what you can and can't fit in. Because for me, it just wasn't sustainable. I should have realized at the time that I was stressed more than I was feeling relaxed, probably upset more than I was happy, and just constantly exhausted. And so, talking about things that you might want to look out for, um, it sounds trite to say, oh, look out for if you're feeling upset or whatever, but it's so easy in this profession, especially to just keep going. Like Jay said, keep swimming, just keep on running on the treadmill and not actually think, hang on a minute, how am I feeling at the moment? Is this working for me? Is there something I need to change? Of course, I'm not talking about a bad day or a busy day. Everyone has those. And in the bar, you might have more than fair few busy days. But if it's becoming your constant that you're having bad days and feeling bad, then it is time to stop and think. So then finally, after about a decade into my practice, I finally realized that the way I was working and living was counterproductive and actually harmful. So first, I did finally step back and evaluate whether the area of law I was practicing in at the time, criminal law, was working for me in terms of lifestyle. And it wasn't, at least not the way I was working, because many of my instructions were still coming out of the Midlands. So I was constantly traveling. I was getting calls at 6 p.m. to go to Wolverhampton to start a trial the next day, reading the trial on the train and staying up and staying in a hotel and then, getting up and doing the trial. Waiting to get paid and last minute instructions and things like that. I absolutely loved the work and the subject matter. I still do. But the lifestyle I realized wasn't working for me. And so that's when I made probably the first positive decision in terms of my well-being, which was to take the leap and move to my current chambers and focus entirely on inquests, inquiry, and public law, where I knew I could have a slightly different lifestyle and also still do something I found and still find fascinating. But habits are hard to break, and I was still taking on too much work, still working all hours, and then had a bit of a shock when I realized it wasn't just impacting my work, but also my health and my well-being. And a couple of years ago, then I took a real step back and I reevaluated things. So I was working on a public inquiry. I spoke to my clerks and we made sure that I could focus for that year almost entirely on that inquiry so that I wasn't trying to overload myself. So effectively, I was working on one big case rather than, as I'd been doing, taking on other sort of trials and cases and inquests and things in the meantime and leaving the inquiry to do that, prepping it in the evenings, going into the inquiry in the day, and it was just getting too much. That was a great way of showing me how I could work and still keep up a practice that I enjoyed, and paid the bills without overworking myself. I went on maternity leave then as I got pregnant, which helped, as it reminded me again that my life was more than just work, because now I had this baby who was, the most important thing to me. And then since I came back from maternity leave end of last year, again, like Jay, I don't always practice what I preach, but I think I have learnt to start becoming more adept at saying no when needed than I used to be. And I definitely agree that's a very important skill to learn, or thing to remember. You should, when you're offered work, evaluate not just are there enough hours in the day to fit in the work, because first of all, we all forget that we're not robots, and you think, oh yeah, I could do that between 10 p.m. and midnight, and that's fine. But you forget how exhausted you can get by then. Um, but so not don't just think, are there enough hours in the day, but will it impact on things like time with your children, or time with your loved ones, or just time to yourself? Will it impact on what you wanted to do? And they always say, even if your plans were to stay in by yourself and watch a movie, those are still plans. So, will the work impact negatively on something that would have made you happy? Do you need that work? Or can you say, actually, this time I don't have time, or I could do it if I have a wider deadline, see if the solicitors are happy with that, etc. It's not, of course, always possible, but where it is, I would recommend it. And I did realize then, the work would still come in. And just because occasionally I said, no, I'm afraid I can't do that. It didn't mean that people would suddenly stop instructing you and they say, oh, she's not at our beck and call. What's going on? If anything, I think they respect it, or they think at least, well, okay, fair enough. But, people are busy. We'll maybe send her something next time. It does help in my chambers. The culture is very supportive. In fact, in all my chambers it has been, but my current chambers, my clerks are fantastic, and that's key as well. Make sure you are in a place where you've got support structures around you. If you're finding that the way that you want your practice to run and the way your, say, clerks want your practice to run don't gel, it may be time to reconsider where you are or what you're doing, because you are in a mutually beneficial relationship. And so it's got to stay mutually beneficial. So lessons, I was, or we were asked to think about some sort of tips or lessons learnt in how to manage the workload. So I totally agree with what Jay said. Again, sometimes you can't do everything. Learn to say no. Um, Another case will come in, and frankly, you're not doing any good to anyone if you take on something that you just can't do well because you don't have the time or you're too exhausted to do it. You're not going to do the client a good service, and you're not doing yourself a good service. Secondly, if you're feeling constantly stressed and under pressure, pressure and stress is part of the job, yes, but if you're constantly feeling stressed and under pressure, take a step back and evaluate things. Think, is the area of law I've chosen right for me? Or do I need to build in more regular breaks? So someone I know, a friend of mine, in fact, regularly manages to book half the week out of her diary to just catch up on life admin and take a break. She's a lot more disciplined than I am, because she figured this out early on in her career, and she's been doing it, and has been all the happier for it. Or are you taking on too much? Do you need to be stricter about pushing back on certain deadlines? So if you're asked for an advice and they say, oh, can you do it by next week? Be honest if you can't, and just say, I could do it in 2 weeks. Would that suffice? And if not, they can go elsewhere. And if so, great. Accept help if you need it. If you're not feeling good, or if you're feeling overwhelmed, definitely the bar is a very supportive and helpful profession, you'll find. So whether it's having a mentor to talk to, asking whether you can have more time on a case, or whether it's help outside your work, so help with childcare or anything like that, ask for help. Don't be afraid to. Don't let your pride get in the way. Another one I've put is, don't feel pressure to know everything. If you don't know, then ask. And the reason I've put that is because you can spend a long time agonizing over a case and then thinking, oh God, I don't know the answer. Maybe I'm rubbish. When actually you might pick up the phone to someone more senior who's been through the exact same case several years ago, and they say, oh yeah, what you want to look at is blah, blah, blah of book, blah, blah, blah. And just off the top of their head, they've guided you in the right direction. And you've got that relief, and you've also got that support, and you feel supported as well. So do it. That's why we have chambers models, so that we can ask advice from people personally and professionally. Make use of it. If you can, and I say if you can because I know it's not always possible, try to build in time where you can to do things you enjoy and that make you feel like you and refreshed. Even if it's short, it could be, a 30-minute workout. It could be taking time to just sit down for a meal and watching a trashy reality TV show. It could be reading or meeting a friend for coffee. If you can't, because some days you just can't, because there's just too much to get done in a day, because everyone's come in with deadlines all at once, or this case has come in tomorrow, or something like that. Don't underestimate the power in taking a change of scene. So sometimes if I'm spending all day, prepping a case or writing an advice or something, or trying to meet a deadline, the four walls around me can start to feel really oppressive. So what helps me sometimes is pack my laptop in my handbag, go to a cafe for an hour or two, get myself a coffee I really like, rather than the kind of instant Nescafe I've got at home. I get like a sugary, syrupy latte or something. Um, and then just enjoy being in a different space, surrounded by different people. It's strange how much of a difference that can make, even though you're working, just to have that change of scenery. Um, so, yeah, those are some sort of lessons you know, we were asked as well about practices we've begun to incorporate to maintain our well-being and the impact it's had. I There's much repetition, but I would say, open dialogue with the clerks about work I can and can't do and about my future practice. We have regular practice meetings, just informally, really, where I sit down with my senior clerks and we say, okay, how do you want the kind of next 6 months or the next few years to look? And it makes you feel A, supported, and B, like there's a plan in place for your career. So you don't just feel like you're helter-skeltering along without a plan. Learning there's more than to life than work, but also accepting that sometimes you do have to pull in the long hours. And when that's the case, just make sure you're surrounded by things that keep you calm and happy. On my desk in chambers, I've got little bits and pieces that kind of little ornaments and things that I like, nice stationery, just things like that. It sounds silly, but things like that can really make a difference. Even working at home, just the fact I'm in my slippers and I've got music I like on, can help. Maybe if you're into meditation and yoga, I actually started sort of trying to meditate a bit, and I did find it really do find it really helps when I manage to do it. It's just about taking that 20 minutes out of your workspace and letting your head get out of it for a bit. I agree with exercising being a great one. I've got a Peloton, not a sponsor of my talk, but I've got a Peloton at home. I have do boxing coaching every week just because that's something I always wanted to learn. And it's not always easy to keep up with the exercise, but when I do, the difference in how I feel is immense. So when I can, I try to. So I would recommend if you're into any sort of sport or exercise, you know, do it. Otherwise, going for a walk to take a break, enjoying the fresh air. There's been a lot written about how nature and fresh air is really good for our senses. So if you've got a park or something near you, go for a walk. Again, it sounds obvious, but it's so easy to forget when you're working to these deadlines and you're just kind of huddled into your books and your laptop and you're stressing yourself out. Generally speaking, have healthy interests outside of work, exercise, reading, whatever. Talk to people in general. Try and build a little sort of network around you, trusted friends or family. Being able to vent to my sister or my friend or my mum or my husband is great because you can just get it off your chest and then you feel renewed and able to go back into work. Sometimes that's what helps the most. And just finally, first and foremost, remember that you and your health and your well-being are important. There is no point in working yourself until you're sick. At the end of the day, not only you will suffer, but everyone in your life will suffer if that happens. And it's not the reason you went into this profession. So I hope some of that at least has been helpful. And thanks again for joining.
Thank you, Ramya. Some really valuable lessons for everyone to take away. So we have up next Reagan. So I'll hand over to you, Reagan.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Reagan Prasad. I'm a barrister at Spire Barristers in Leeds. So I don't practice in London. I practice in one of the cities. I'm in Leeds, and I do family law, and in particular, I do children law. I also sit as a deputy district judge, and I do some lecturing on the side as well. Um, and I'm also one of the few members of the bar who happens to be queer. So I put all that out there to let you know sort of my overworking side, but also the fact that, like many of you, because this is a diversity event, I come with my own hang-ups, I come with my own insecurities, and I have chips on my shoulder about lots of things in my own life, as you can imagine. Which means that when I came to the bar, I was in many ways an overworker, a workaholic, certainly pre-pupillage, which I think is where most of you are. I would study, I would do lots of work experience pieces on the side. I would be doing something every evening or every weekend. And I didn't really make time for friends or family enough. I didn't make time for myself enough. I didn't sleep enough. I was eating a lot of nonsense when I should be eating healthily. And so those, I suppose, were my pre-pupillage years. In pupillage, the situation wasn't much better, unfortunately. I think there is a sense when you are someone who is a person of color, is a person who, for me, I was a first generation immigrant, who is a member of the queer community, that you need to prove yourself and that you need to be working really hard for a better life, but also to receive validation, as if your worth would be defined by some external source. And I think for many years in my life, that defined my working habits. In pupillage, I would work pretty much every evening, every weekend that came my way. And if I hit deadlines, if I got a good job or a well done, that would mean so much to me. It would define me in so many ways. Thankfully, after pupillage, I got tenancy. I was lucky to get tenancy in the set I am in now, so Spire. I did my pupillage in Leeds and I got tenancy in Leeds and I've stayed ever since. And then in the early years of my career, I spent a lot of time, again, working incredibly hard, thinking that quite rightly, I suppose, thinking that I need to build a practice. But I did that through a lot of seminars, delivering a lot of seminars, writing a lot of articles, taking every case that came my way. And if someone was to say to me, what regrets do you have in your life, Reagan? Well, there are two big regrets that always stand out for me. On my 26th birthday and on my 30th birthday, I worked both of those. I had big plans. One of them, I was going to go away. I got a high court case on both of those occasions, and I was a relatively junior barrister. And I decided that being in the High Court, pushing my career was far more important than actually enjoying those big milestones in my life. And at the back of my mind, I always said, well, you've always got next year. You've always got next year. COVID was a real eye opener for me in respect of well-being, in respect of looking after myself. COVID hit, and all of a sudden I didn't have next year because the world shut down, because it became clear that I might not have the chance to go clubbing or go to Cyprus or any of those things for birthdays for a while. And I suppose it really led to me, and I suspect many barristers, having a real rethink around what is important to me in life. Um, and I did a lot of soul searching. I did a lot of looking at what matters to me. And I would give you this piece of advice that I have come across, which some of you may have come across and some of you may not have come across. There are only two people in this world that you need to make proud. There is the 7-year-old version of you, and there is the 70-year-old version of you. And so I would ask all of you to take a moment and just think about the 7-year-old version of you and all the dreams and hopes that you had for yourself at that point. And ask yourself, am I on the road to achieving those? Am I working hard to achieve those? Or have I already achieved those? And if you have, be proud of yourself in many ways. But equally, the struggle that I have and the journey I have now moving forward in my life is less about the 7-year-old, because in many ways I have overachieved whatever I wanted at the age of 7. But it's more about the 70-year-old version of me, the version of me who might not have health, who might not have strength, who might not have the loved ones around me anymore. And looking back on my life and thinking, well, when I had those opportunities, how did I spend them? And I can tell you now that for me, it was, I realized that I don't want my gravestone to say, here lies Reagan, she worked hard. I wanted more out of life. And that became a big part of how I viewed well-being. And that idea of making those two versions proud of myself has become a big part and parcel of how I live my life now and what I prioritize in my life. So whereas up to COVID, I was a huge workaholic, Now I am far more relaxed about my work. I am far more focused on making sure that whilst I would like and I have a career that is stimulating, a career that is exciting in many ways, I don't take so many cases that mean that I'm working every evening and weekend. I have learned to say no when it's appropriate for myself. That doesn't mean you say no at every opportunity. It is important to push yourself out of your comfort zone and grow. But it is also important to know when it's not about growth, it's about harming yourself and harming your well being, and step back and say no in those moments. Opportunities will always come in life. Saying no ever so often to protect yourself and to prioritize yourself, it is not going to ruin your career. For me, I now try and focus on a few things. I try and focus on sleeping well, and I would recommend that to all of you, is make sure you get 8 hours a day, minimum, I say. Make sure you eat well, because what you put in your body now will make a difference later in life. And you may feel that I'm being patronizing by saying that. But the thing about this job is, as much of a blessing as it is, and I'm sure everyone on the link, all of the barristers will agree with me that it is a blessing. We are very privileged to do the work we do. It can eat you alive if you let it. There are always cases. There are always people begging for you to come on board and help out. There is always the odd bit of work that needs to be done. There is always the solicitor that wants to talk to you, or the lay client that wants a conference, or the case that needs a position statement filed yesterday. If you let it, it will eat you alive, this job. And you have to learn to set appropriate boundaries and say, no, I'm going to take that time out for myself. The third thing I would say, so we have sleep, we have eat, and I would say move, because a big part of growing, a big part of growing old, unfortunately, is staying healthy and active. And so eating, sleeping, and moving have become a big part of what I spend time in my life prioritizing now. I think the other thing that I spend a lot of time prioritizing is the people around me who matter. It's very easy when you are climbing for this job and seeing it as your dream job, and it is a dream job. I won't sit here and say it isn't. It's very easy to consider that I'll make time for my parents later, I'll make time for my siblings later, my kids later. Um, Later doesn't always come. You can always make more money. There are people in their 70s doing degrees now and changing their careers entirely. But once the loved ones are gone, or once the opportunities are missed with them, for instance, children who grow up, you don't get those chances again. And so there is a balance to be struck. There is a balance between your dreams, and there is a balance between making sure that your life is not consumed by this job. And so if I were to give you some advice, it would be around managing your time to make sure that those people aren't a secondary consideration, but that you make time for them now when you can and spend that time with them. Take the time out you need. Make the time for the people who are important. And don't, I would say to you, take criticism or insults personally. Again, I come back to the fact that I am a first generation immigrant. I'm a person of color. And I would say, although some people may disagree with me, that there are certain hang-ups that come with that. There is the desire to prove that you are good enough at all times. There is the desire to work extra hard because you feel as though you're running a race where you're already behind. Um, which means that sometimes when you get criticized, that can be a very difficult pill to swallow. I'll tell you something about the profession, which I hope the other barristers will agree with me on. Every day is a school day in this job. You do learn something every day, no matter how senior you are. But as I've gotten a little bit more senior, I realized that not every school day is a good day. And by that, what I mean is one day I might get criticized by a judge for taking a point, that a different judge on a different day might praise me in the judgment for having taken it on another case. And so sometimes there isn't always the right way to do things. Sometimes there is a way that you just have to do things and see how it lands, depending on the tribunal you're in front of. You cannot therefore let criticism impact on you in a significant way. Of course, you can learn, of course, you can grow, but equally, you have to be able to roll with the punches. Don't let this career, don't let any career define who you are and your worth. You are worthy and good enough just by virtue of being you. And remember that, because otherwise you will end up in a situation where you may well let the career consume you, and you may find that criticism is taken too personally. And that isn't any life worth living, really. When it comes to the way then that you achieve these, I'm going to call them philosophical goals, but equally they are realistic goals. When it comes to the way that you achieve that, I'll tell you what it is I started to do. That's been quite effective for me over the last maybe 2 or 3 years. I make sure that I plan my time out in advance. So if I know, for instance, at Christmas the work will be less, then I will book that time off, and I will be incredibly strict with that. If anybody comes to me going, "Oh, do you mind covering this urgent case or that urgent case?" I'm sorry, I've booked that time out. I've got to take that time off. And I'm very clear with and firm with my boundaries. Equally, I have made sure that I make plans for this time off so that the people and the situations that matter to me get that time, and I'm not compromising it elsewhere. But that means that when I am at work, I need to work in a certain productive manner to make sure that I can earn the living I need and push my career in the direction that I still want it to go. So there are a few things I do around that. One of them is that like has been said to you already, I plan the time for working. If you know you've got 4 hours this afternoon that you have to get something done because you have made other plans in the evening, you'll be surprised how much more focused and efficient you are with those 4 hours than if you say, "Oh, I've got all day." Because I know from experience that if I say I've got all day to do something, 2 hours of Netflix in the morning and 3 hours of Amazon Prime in the afternoon later, I'm finishing that task at midnight. And so it helps me, and it may help you, to block time out and make plans around it. And you'll find that you're far more focused in getting things done and achieving what you need to in a set time. Equally, though, there are certain things that I think are really good practices that you can put in place in terms of how you work that may assist. So, for instance, never embark on tasks without fully understanding what it is you need to do. Don't be afraid to go back and ask the question, "Can I just clarify this? I know I've asked this. I know I've asked lots of questions around this, but can I just be very clear that what is expected is this, and this, and where I can find that is here, here, and here." If you embark on something that you don't fully understand, you may find that you have to do the job twice. And you may find that you don't always impress people because they will think, "Well, she's just done it or he's done it entirely wrong." So you want to think about that. You want to make those plans, make those inquiries early. So when you do spend your time working, you are efficient with it and you achieve what you need to properly. Set yourself realistic timescales as well about tasks to complete. So one of the things that barristers, and we're particularly bad at doing, I think, and we're getting better, is you will say, as has already been said to you, "Oh, I'll just spend 10 till 12 doing that. And I'll get that done by tomorrow because I'll give up 10 till 12 tonight." Or I'll just get up at 4. For me, it used to be, "I'll get up at 4 a.m. and get it done. Don't worry, you'll have it at 9 a.m. before I go to court." And some of you may say, "Reagan, that's an exaggeration." No, it is not. Many mornings in my junior years was spent with 4 a.m. starts and me taking work and setting deadlines that were entirely unreasonable and unrealistic and affected my well-being greatly. So be realistic with timescales. Say to people, "Well, realistically, I can get it by this point." And if unfortunately that doesn't work for them, let me tell you, there is always work out there. There could be another case that you can pick up. Don't break your back. Don't sacrifice your well-being for the sake of any particular case, because there's always more work. And equally, if when you embark upon doing something, you realize, "Oh my goodness, this is going to take me a lot longer," manage expectations. Get in touch with people who set the deadlines and explain the difficulties you're having and ask if there's any opportunity for it to come a little bit later. One of the things about the self-employed bar is you will be in charge of your own destiny. You will be in charge of your own workload. You will be in charge of your own reputation. And so you have to learn to put these soft skills into place around managing expectations, setting realistic timescales, asking for clarity before you embark upon tasks. They are all ways to make sure that you are more efficient with what you do and how you achieve it, whilst also making sure that you make time for yourself. And I tend to find that if I put those things in place, I am far more efficient and still manage to achieve my career goals alongside having an actual life, alongside having a chance to rest. What I would say is, therefore, is to wrap this up, I suppose, what I'm saying to you is This is an incredibly fulfilling career, but equally, it is a career that I think, particularly if you're someone like me and you come from an immigrant background and you have your own hang-ups, you can end up seeing as a way to make you feel validated and heard. Remember that you are your own source of validation. Remember that this is about your life, not anybody else's life. And look at what will make you proud of yourself later in life, what will make you proud of yourself if you look back when you were younger, and aim for those goals in life. Setting yourself also realistic expectations of what you can do, but also making sure that when it comes to the things you want out of life, the relationships, the experiences, if you want to see the world, go and see the world. Make sure that you achieve those things now, because you won't always have those opportunities in the world. And no job is worth giving your life to. Thank you very much for listening. I'll hand over now to the next speaker.
Thank you, Regan. You raised some really important points about the struggle that come with coming from a minority background and guarding your well-being as you sort of progress throughout your career. So our last speaker for the evening is Master Rachel Spearing Casey. So I'll hand over now.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. Well, I'm blown away, if I'm honest. I'm not sure, despite being the last speaker, how I'm going to follow all of these fabulous people. I'm really grateful that this is being hosted this evening. I just wish that something like this had existed 28 years ago when I was probably in your shoes and attending these events for the Inn. But I'm thrilled that actually we are now beginning to really have these conversations at your stage. So by the time you get to the stages that some of us who've spoken tonight have been through and the challenges that we've experienced, you will, I hope, have a host of skills and tools in your toolkit to be deploying them to make your journey better. So my name is Rachel Spearing, as I've been introduced. I am a practitioner at Sergeants' Inn Chambers. I have a diverse background myself because I started life as what would be described through the Pupillage Access Support Scheme. I am featured as one of the first 100 years pioneers for the work that I've initiated in wellbeing at the bar. But some of that has been born out of the adverse experiences that I've had along the way personally myself. And some of that was linked to, like many of the speakers who have spoken tonight, being about their own diversity and the challenges when you come from a non-traditional background, or when you see yourself as being different and have those different views of yourself, or wishing to be of and belong to a profession which has had its own traits and behaviours. And when I was joining the bar in 1999, that was seen as a very traditional and male-dominated environment. It had very little diversity on show. But what I came to learn was that actually diversity was within the bar at that time. It just wasn't as obvious or spoken about by those that were part of it. And so in my early stages at the career, I really struggled hugely with imposter syndrome, and I was lucky that I found pupillage relatively easily, unlike the difficult journeys that some of the other speakers have had. But I started my pupillage in Liverpool. I have practiced on the Northern Circuit, the Western Circuit, and the Southeastern Circuit. I've travelled and practiced overseas. And for me, well-being has meant not just surviving in whatever my work or life was at that time, but learning to thrive within it. So learning to understand how psychological well-being and performance work together, and how you can grow as a human being, and you can really begin to develop knowledge of yourself as well as the issues in your practice. So my journey to improving well-being has arisen because some of the core significant issues that I've experienced is I've had burnout, obviously started with imposter syndrome. I was exposed and suffered burnout, without repeating the stories that you've already heard, similar experiences of working very hard, critical perfectionism, having insecurities and difficulty with recovering from setbacks, whether they be setback in a case or feedback or actual experiences, that adverse experiences I was experiencing as part of that roving room culture that existed in the early parts of career that I had in different circuit life. And unfortunately, in the latter part of my career, probably about 12, 13 years in, I experienced secondary trauma. And that was related to some of the work that I had done. I had been deployed, had started my life as a criminal practitioner. I had undertaken secondments with a variety of very interesting organisations. So I had served through the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. I had served the service prosecutions authorities of our armed forces, and I had been deployed as parts of the operational work of Herrick through wars that had happened periodically, that I had provided some legal advice and support and assistance to on secondment. I'd worked within the Serious Organised Crime Agency and Revenue and Customs Prosecutions Office as they were then. And so I'd seen quite a lot of different things happening. And as a self-employed, single, fairly independent and estranged practitioner, you are not in the same fold as when you're working for an organisation or you're belonging, as many police officers or emergency service workers are, where these concepts and these issues were known and recognised, and where you were safeguarded in a way that, as a self-employed practitioner at the bar, we do not have, or did not have at that time, the same procedural obligations, duties, awareness, knowledge, and training available. So my experience has been that I have learned, I would probably say, the hard way. I also really saw the trials and tribulations of colleagues that were around me, because I recognised in myself these struggles and these challenges and these issues in others. And I held some representational roles in the circuits that I belonged in. I was the junior of the Western Circuit. I'd been involved in leadership roles for and with Bar Council in other representational factors, and as part of the military roles that I'd taken on, I'd had responsibilities for others. So I had seen these difficulties and the fact that leadership was needed, and that we should understand this and take responsibility for it, to educate and to safeguard all of us who are providing service, whether that be as an independent practitioner or part of a team, and whether that is as a circuit where you have members, or as an inn where you have members, and where as a bar council you have a representational feature for the entirety of that profession. So wellbeing really for me began in earnest because of some tragic events of colleague suicides that I'd experienced, of colleagues professionally, financial challenges, and the catastrophes associated with some of the experiences personally I'd seen and the impact they had had. I had always learned through the training and through the recovery that I needed to learn to take my temperature. And one of the works that we have put into the Bar Council's resources for wellbeing at the bar is a fantastic piece of information developed as an animation now by now Professor then Dr. Bill Mitchell, who showed us where and why and how barristers are more at risk as a profession. So we learned through some of the work we began in 2012, through the research that we then published in 2015, that barristers are highly tuned to critical perfectionism. We learn to be critically perfectionist in our work. And so the reality of how we learn to then turn that on ourselves is a very, very thin, wafer thin reality. And we don't just turn it on ourselves, we can also be at risk of turning it towards others. And so our relationships and our obsessiveness and the compulsive behaviours of the drive that we have, because we are seeking constantly to strive, to learn, to become better, to represent our clients fearlessly and faithfully, to be responsible for the outcomes, sometimes feeling personally responsible in reflective, destructive practices, where things don't go well and where we have setbacks, whether they are personal setbacks in the decisions that we have made, or whether they are professional setbacks in a case not going our way that we thought should. And so this concept of being on and learning resilience was really critical and has been critical now to us trying to put educational training together and trying to develop and understand how we need to realise that the career that is being a barrister, and as you've learned, it is an absolute marathon. 40. We don't think ever of. I can't quite believe. Firstly, I'm a KC. I'm not sure how that happened, and the fact that I've been doing it as long as I have. But the truth is that it is a longevity career, and that you simply cannot, if you're a human being, you cannot drive. You wouldn't think of driving your car up and down the motorway constantly with your foot on the gas and just putting the fuel in on the run, or buying constantly from the garage takeaways to eat along the way without blowing your car up. But that's in fact what for generations we have sadly done as barristers. It's why we've had the poor coping strategies. It's why we have had, according to some of our data, really high levels of burnout, very poor coping strategies with alcohol, misuse of other antisocial behavioural choices to cope and to learn with these maladapted issues that arise. So speaking about physical and mental health, understanding psychological health and psychological physical well-being is really critical to surviving and learning to thrive in what is, I'm afraid to tell you, a constantly demanding career. And somebody described this to me in their early years, for the first 2 or 3 years in practice. They said to me, I feel like I'm in the final of Strictly Come Dancing every single day, that I'm getting out and I'm doing the 3 busting routines constantly, trying to learn complex issues, trying to perform constantly on the absolute fringes, and being watched by these 4 judges who are going to hold a scorecard up, which might determine my fate, either whether I'm going to be kept or whether I'm going to be given the opportunity to do better work or to continue to be briefed. So, that was a starkness that I reflected on and thought, I absolutely have been on this curve. And there are zones when you, if you look at the Wellbeing at the Bar page and you click on the Staying Well icon and you watch the animation of the audio of Bill Mitchell with the animation behind it, you will learn that pressure and stress is an everyday part of our existence as human beings. We need some pressure to get out of bed in the morning, to have a reason to go to work. Otherwise, we can be at the bottom end in the blue zone, and we can feel underinvolved, frustrated, bored, not stimulated, have no motivation and no mojo to do anything. When you start to have opportunity and begin giving access to these opportunities as you are as a barrister, you find yourself really coming to life. This is just what you've waited for. This is what you've dreamed of. You've landed that dream opportunity, or you're constantly just so close to it that if you strive a bit harder, if you work a bit longer, and if you learn a little bit more, if you spend that time going to all of these events, if you have the opportunity to meet people, and if you socialize in the right circles and not miss out on any opportunity that you're given, you will also find that time being well spent. The reality is that finding this optional functioning time and where and how, making those choices around what you do, is really critical to, as people have said already, learning to say no, learning to understand what your own bandwidth might need. And so learning to take that temperature and recognize when you're not in that good zone, when you're not optimally functioning. And you will have all been in a place where you are just in control, you're doing something really interesting, you're stimulated in the tasks you've got ahead, you are enjoying the challenge, you are understanding what you need to do to fulfill that task, and you're beginning to go through it and feel like you have that sense of competency and achievement in doing that. There is then this twist, very simply, into a red zone where you start to feel tense or on edge, because you are perhaps not understanding those tasks. You're not feeling comfortable. You are no longer feeling in control. You may realize that you have reduced creativity then. You start to find difficulty in concentrating or have problems with your memory. You might be like I used to, reading the same page over and over again, just not absorbing the information, not able to follow things, and feeling a sense of overwhelm or indecisiveness about what it is you're trying to do. That can lead to an obvious reduced efficacy, where you're going around in circles and we're actually pulling those all-nighters, as all of us have done, all those early mornings, because we've set these unrealistic deadlines, are absolutely catastrophic to our performance, and our quality, not just our quality of life and our quality of health, but actually our quality of work and our quality of delivery of service to the people that we are hoping to serve. So these are critical pressures that I've learned, that the career is always going to be demanding. The curve is always going to be there. And learning to understand what your tips, what your telltale signs are. When do you know when you're firing on all cylinders? What is it that you're doing? And most of you will find and feel that sometimes it might have been because you've had good sleep, you've connected with individual people who have supported you in a task, you know the direction of travel, you are comfortable and confident in the time you've got to do it, and you're delivering that without distraction. You get positive feedback, or if you don't get positive feedback, you understand the quality of the feedback that you've been given and what you need to do to feed forward. So for me, how I've learned over the time of my career to manage workload has been to practicing learning, firstly, being trauma informed. And what does that mean? That is both for myself and also for others. Where you have, or you are going to, as many of us do, work in areas where we have contact with people or subject matter or content review, either in inquiries or investigative work, or in the subject individuals are discussing with you where they have been exposed to trauma. You really need to understand and have some safeguarding procedures around that. And again, there are resources on the Bar website, the Bar Council's website, and there is training available as part of your continuing professional development to invest in that. And considering what I now do is I limit what I need to see. I think about, do I need to watch everything? Do I need to look at the original source material? Can I look and speak to individuals indirectly where we are not having the subject matter in focus, with photographs, with videos? Of course, the danger that we now have in the digital age is that we are not just reading about the statements of what happened, we are often able to witness it because it has been filmed, it has been recorded, and we are not just watching it once to understand the evidence, we are looking at it over and over and over again so that we can compare our instructions, or we can take instructions from our clients about situations, perhaps if they are an immigrant individual who is seeking asylum, who is trying to explain what has happened to them in war-torn places, to prove their status, to show that they have been present, to explain this in granular detail, to be able to be validated or verified by a tribunal that is seeking to take them to task over the authenticity of that application. These are all areas that as new and young practitioners, you will enthusiastically and wholeheartedly commit yourself to protecting and fighting for the rights of those individuals, sometimes without real awareness as to how that long and slow drip of that content may impact you. So looking also to protect others from constantly speaking about that. And I have learned that there are procedures that you can do for that. I don't think I've got time to carry on talking just about one subject. The issue of time management and factoring in your own preparation, delivery and recovery when you're instructed in a case, for me, is absolutely critical and key. I have heard through the many talks and conversations with all practitioners this area of overloaded work time and a lack of ability to set the time parameters and the demands of delivery that is expected of them. So the periods of work are completely overshadowing their home lives or their sleep or their opportunity to recover. For me, practices that I've begun to incorporate is looking at planning that time management to include not just the reading time, the preparatory time, the delivery time, how I'm working when I'm actually in a case. And in the early years, when leading teams and groups of people, setting working time directives was really important, either saying to a judge or opponents, we will work between this time and this time. We will not review material received after that time. So that's skeleton arguments or submissions received late, or judges who expected us to be able to turn around responses and sit at 9:30 to deal with issues that arose on the hoofing cases, had to have their expectations managed because we had caring responsibilities, because we were in a weeks and weeks of case where we needed to protect our own physical health and be able to function through the delivery and through the service that we were providing to the courts, whether that was for clients or whether that was for the Crown. We began to have these conversations about reasonable adjustments, where and what they were, and how that needed to be delivered. And that takes courage. It takes courage to speak up, like many of the speakers before me, to explain what those factors are. And all of the judiciary have had training as to not just the legal requirements of the Equality and Diversity Expectations and the Equality Act of granting a reasonable adjustment, but also from the circuits and from the Specialist Bar Association leadership as to the pressures and the challenges of practitioners and the demands that they have and how they need to be accommodated. So I hope, as someone who is in those positions now, as a governing bencher and as someone who leads in other areas, that where challenges are experienced, people will either speak up directly, or if they're not heard, they will come to one of their leadership figures, whether that's as part of the Specialist Bar Association or a senior member of chambers or an equality and diversity officer, or someone who you can trust to have a conversation safely with about whatever issues are arising. And sadly, we know that there are not always positive experiences alive at the bar. And so we are encouraging people, and we are trying to provide those venues for people to speak out. I echo the digital detox. I also have, I do not have my work email on my phone. I have it on my iPad, but I don't have it on my personal phone because I'm telling you honestly, I don't have the discipline not to look at it. So I have to provide my own safeguards and boundaries. And I have holidays where I put on out of office and I'm very clear that I am digitally detoxing to allow myself to just be unplugged. The sleep, diet and exercise is also critical. And that allows all of that critical pent up physiological chemical changes, which if you watch that video, you will learn that these are the key absolute basic foundations for you to be able to help to sleep. I have sleep hygiene routines where I will stop work at a certain time. Sometimes I will need to take a bath with my salts and candles and just prepare myself to try and sleep, because sleep deprivation, again, is a real key factor for me to know when I'm not in that good place and when I start to ruminate and slip from the good thought processes. And connection is absolutely key. Connection to your colleagues. You will find a warm welcome by so many of colleagues, whether that's in chambers, in roving rooms, or in other places. Surround yourself with good people. Join the circuits, the specialist bar associations, the specialist interest groups that you have. You will find kindred spirits. You will find people who are your tribe, whatever they look like. The bar is incredibly diverse. Foolishly, I thought there was nobody like me when I joined. And it takes grit, courage, a growth mindset. I just want to finish, I think, with this, that reflective practice is really important. We hold critical perfectionism and negative thoughts 5 times longer than a positive. So do not allow your critical perfectionistic traits and behaviors, which we will all have, to destroy you. Learnt behavior, resilience comes from learnt behavior. So investing in your continued practice management, the skills of positive psychology, reading about Martin Seligman's positive psychology, Angela Duckworth's grit, the growth mindset, and other positive psychology works are on the bar website. But also there is a lot of other work that's being done by some of the specialist bar associations for shadowing. The new chair of the bar is steering our future for developing reflective practices and having supportive structures in place. So I hope that as the Inn, we will continue to build on this work. And I hand over back to the fabulous hosts who we will continue to support and who are the next generation to take this forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Master Spearing. That's some really powerful advice there, and I think lots for our audience members to take away. So we just have a couple of minutes left to take questions. So if I could ask all of our panel members to please come on camera.
So when I'm clicking the video, it's saying it's been disabled by the host. So I don't know what's going on.
Have a look.
I'm the same.
Okay.
Sorry, it should be better now, is it?
Yes, we've got everybody. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Thanks, Kofo. So if I could just ask each of our panel members to give a very brief response, and then we can cover more in the few minutes that we've got left. So one of the first questions that came in was for Jay, and the question is, were your intense efforts ever driven by financial pressures in your early career? And did this ease as you became more established in your practice?
No, that wasn't really the case for me. I've got a kind of strangely mixed background. So on the one hand, I am the son of a refugee war child immigrant. But on the other hand, my parents came to this country, and my father in particular had a real mission to reverse the fortunes of the family in one generation and give his children, a completely different life. So I'm not unaffected at all by that background, but I personally was not particularly under financial pressure at the beginning of my career.
Thank you. Next question we have, I believe, Regan, you'll be best placed to answer this one. So the question is, have you ever doubted your place in the profession due to adversity? And if so, what helped you regain your confidence?
I think we can all answer that and say yes is the obvious answer to that. You do doubt your place in the profession, especially if you end up being criticised. for something you work really hard on or for something that's out of your control. And these things do happen. I think I'd be naive and I would be doing all of you a disservice to say you don't get situations where you feel as though people are talking down to you based on how you look, based on your gender, based on your accent. I think every one of us on this panel will say at some point in our career, we've probably felt that that's exactly what's happening. But you also get lifted up by people who will surprise you. And you will find that you have just as many allies as you do enemies out there, if I was to call them allies and enemies. And I'll tell you a little story, and it will be short, but to help you to put this in perspective. I remember that a few years ago, I was on a case in the High Court to do with when the war first broke out in Ukraine, and we had a little child. And the question was whether we send the child back to the father who was in Ukraine and who could care appropriately for him. But of course, it was a war-torn country at this point. And my opponent was a Silk who would speak down to me, who very much at one point laughed in my face when I told him what my reading of the relevant convention was and what it would mean. And of course, you can never prove these things, but I got a sense that it was very much how does this little woman really know what the law is compared to me? I don't know if that's actually what it is, but I can only tell you the sense I had and the feeling. We went before the High Court judge, who I initially said to her, my lady, I appreciate other parties have taken a different interpretation of this. I think it's important that you hear from me why I've taken the view I have, but ultimately it is a matter for you and you may rule against me. At which point, she'd read all of our skeleton arguments, at which point she turned to me and she said, Miss Basod, don't worry, I don't need to hear from you. I actually need to hear from everyone else as to why you're wrong. And then she went down the row and decimated every one of them, one by one. And I think in particular for that Silk, she was particularly decimating towards him and ultimately found in my favour. At the conclusion of that case, and I will name her because she's a wonderful human being for having done it and she needs the credit for that. Mrs. Justice Tice called me and asked to see me at the conclusion of that case and told me that I had done a fantastic job, that she was really impressed at the way I had looked at the law, and that she was the one that encouraged me to apply for a judicial role after that case. So the reason I tell you that story is to say that in one breath, at the start of that case, I was kicked down and made to feel as though I didn't belong and I wasn't good enough and I wasn't smart enough. And by the end of that case, I was encouraged by a High Court judge to put in a judicial application. That is the way it goes in this profession. So don't let it put you off that you might be kicked down along the way, because there will be people who will lift you up and lift you higher into places that you never thought possible for you to reach.
Thank you, Regan. And next question is for Ramya. And the question is, how do you balance the need to show strength with the importance of vulnerability and seeking help?
That's a good question. Well, yes, you need to some extent, obviously show confidence in what you're doing, etc. But remember as well that showing vulnerability can itself be a strength, because it can help endear people to you and then and also help you gain, as Reagan was talking about, allies as well. One thing to remember when you're thinking about this profession is that pretty much in my experience, or my view anyway, most of the barristers who you meet, who you think, wow, they look great and confident, etc., are inside themselves insecure, worried, concerned about things. All their insecurities from pupillage and pre-pupillage days are there. So if you show them your vulnerabilities, very often you'll find that people come back and say, well, I was worrying about the exact same thing. And in that way, you both support each other. So yes, of course, don't go around kind of opening up to everybody who you've just met and telling them all about why you're rubbish and you don't deserve to be a barrister or anything like that. But don't fall into the trap of thinking that you have to put on this bravado to everybody, and that's the strength. It's really about trying to balance the two. Find the people you trust in chambers, be more open with them, and therefore use their support to make you even stronger and better in your profession, I would say. Hope that answers the question.
It does. Thank you, Ramya. And our last question is for Master Spearing. And the question is, do you feel that the subject of well-being is better understood at the bar now following COVID, or is there still a stigma attached to it?
I think the stigma has very much been tackled by not just COVID, but by the leadership pieces that have been done. People showing their authenticity and sharing the stories as we have for the last 10 years has made us realize that um, it, mental health and physical health can go together. 1 in 4 people at some point in their life will experience an issue that impacts that, whether that is a temporary or a more longevitable issue. And barristers are not superhuman; they're not exempt from that data. So I think the stigma is very much being addressed and has been addressed, but there is always going to be the naysayers. There will always be the people that may, whatever those issues are, will always want to undermine. And so I would say to everybody that we need to normalize it. We are speaking more about these things. I want to end with someone else's quote, which is Maya Angelou's quote, who says, "Nothing will work unless you do." And we are surrounding you and want to lift you up and hold you up because you are the next generation to carry on the work. And I will hand over and hand back to you, and hope that you keep talking about it, and you keep learning and developing your EQ and your IQ to be the best barristers that you deserve to be.
Thank you very much, Master Spearing. So we've now reached the end of the evening. I'll just ask each of our speakers to provide some parting words of advice. So Jay, we'll start with you, if you're happy to do so. You're on mute.
Sure. Well, that's a COVID classic, isn't it? I would say just think about longevity, right? For those of you starting, you'll have eagerness, stamina, all of those great things, but it will be different things that take you through the later parts of your career. So just think about, there's that phrase, isn't there? What got you here won't get you there.
Thank you. Ramya, any last words?
Yeah, I think the main thing, if there's one thing that I'd ask you to take away today, is to just take the time to regularly step back and just check in with how you are. And if when you do that, you realize you're not happy, don't be afraid to change things. It can be too easy to just stick with what we're doing because it's what we know. And just to say, you don't want to get to the end of your career and look back and realize you weren't happy for the majority of it. That's what pushed me to make the changes I did, and I'm much happier for it.
Thank you, Ramya. Regan?
I suppose my parting words to you is to remember that the only person you need to make proud is yourself. But especially when you come from a diverse background, you might feel you need to make your parents proud, your grandparents proud. You might feel you need to have to prove a point to someone else. Don't lose yourself in a process to prove a point to anyone else. Be proud of who you are, and remember what you wanted out of life, and what, when you look back, you might want out of life, and go for that. And as long as you're happy with where you're at and where you get to, that's enough, and you've lived a good life and you've had a good career.
Thank you, Regan. Finally, Master Spearing.
Fit your own oxygen mask first, as the emergency tells you when you get on a plane, that nothing, as I said, nothing will work unless you do. Inculcate into your practice management and core skills. You can claim it on your CPD plans now, that these wellbeing events, whether they are advocacy to improve your client care and interaction, think about how the training or the wellbeing tips or the interactions and learning that you need to be a better barrister, to service your clients, or to survive the longevity of this profession, and put that into your practice development, commit to it, evaluate it, and grow with it.
Excellent, thank you. And so a big thank you to all our panelists for giving up their evening and providing some really helpful advice for everyone going forward. And thank you to everyone else for joining. There are lots of resources out there for you to make use of. The first being Wellbeing at the Bar, that's got some lots of really helpful information, as well as the Racial Equality Society's wellness officers. So if you're struggling with anything or you need any support, please reach out. And that is it for this evening. Thank you everyone for joining. Please feel free to log off.